So today we're going to be talking about how to decode a question in a Year 12 Literature ATAR exam. So let's start with some tips that we're talking about. First of all, we want to determine what type of response is being asked for. Is it using a STEM word like argue, discuss, explain, explore, analyse or examine? Think about that, because that will determine the kind of response you'll give. What are the key discriminators of the question? That means there are key words in there that the examiners have set up to discriminate, to separate the students who really understand their text and content, they understand their concepts, from those who don't really understand the concept. And we'll talk about that in a moment. What are the key syllabus terms and concepts found in the question? That's critical because that's where the marking key is going to be driving at, and that's where the question is derived from. It is how are the syllabus concepts expressed in the question? And then how does this relate to my studied texts? Because a key part of your response is how well you understand the text you have studied in your course. So now let's have a look a bit further down here, and let's take an example from the 2017 literature exam. The question is, discuss the way language has been used to give a voice to the marginalised in one or more texts. So let's think first about the kind of question this is. This is a discussion question. Let me get a highlighter here, so we'll get a yellow highlighter, and we've got a purple highlighter instead. This is a discussion question, so that's the kind of answer you have. It's not about an argument or anything like that. It's about discussing the content of this question. This is a question that is specifically about language. This is looking at how you can understand how language has been deployed by the poet, the author, the playwright in your text. And then it is how it's been used to give a voice to the marginalised. Look inside the glossary of your syllabus and look up the word voice. That word is important. We've got a voice to the marginalised. Let me go back to my screen here. And it's about the marginalised. You need to understand that concept of marginalisation in text and what it means to be marginalised. It's an important syllabus concept, and you need to be able to look at that in terms of the question. So that word marginalised, and has one or more literary texts. So that does not mean you have to be limited to one, so you can refer to two, but do ensure that the primary text you refer to in this question is fitting the exam rules. That means that if you have done poetry in section 1, that you're responding primarily to either prose or drama in this question. And so what are the discriminators in this question? What are the things that markers need to look at in order to separate students? The first one here is this word language. That's really important because if you're talking about anything other than language, you're not really responding to the question. And it's the key discriminator here will be the degree to which you understand the concept of marginalisation and how you connect this idea of a voice being given to the marginalised through language. It's not enough to say that there are marginalised characters. It's not enough to just say what marginalisation is. You have to make that connection between how the voice of the marginalised has been given to those characters or those social groups through the language of the text. So let's then have a look now at an example of how this could work. So how do we go from question to thesis? Let me just drag this bit up a bit. Oops. So how do we go from having that question to getting to a thesis, getting to a strong introduction? So I'm going to be using Hamlet here as my example, and I'll read it to you and we'll talk through it. In places and times when opportunities were incredibly limited for marginalised groups to be given a voice in public life, it has been in the world of literature where these voices have been heard. With Hamlet, 1599, William Shakespeare gives voice to the experience of women in Renaissance England through two interesting yet very different characters, Gertrude and Ophelia. This position is problematic, however, because in discussing the voice given to women in this play, we need to keep in mind that these voices are mediated both through the writer himself and the male performers at first production. Nevertheless, despite this problem of the mediated female voice, Shakespeare gives us two complicated women who must wrestle with the marginalised positions in the world of Shakespeare's play. By discussing the language of these women and the language used to marginalise them, we can see how they've been given a voice in the play. So one of the things I often teach you is that make sure the final sentence of your introduction is your thesis statement, is exactly your argument. So let's look at the structure of this introduction to see how that works. So the first half of my introduction is about me wrestling with the terms of the question and doing some of that handshake sort of stuff with my reader. Just a quick note. That year, 1599, Hamlet could have been written anywhere from 1599 to 1602. It depends on what the different scholars say. But my first question my first sentence here is about negotiating the question. And here I'm putting this idea of marginalisation in terms of public life, and that literature gives voice to that. Literature is a powerful medium for that. I haven't made a grand statement like through the history of literature or anything like that. I've kept it fairly specific here, and I've got straight to the text I'm going to be referring to. Hamlet giving a voice to the experience of women. I'm referring specifically now to the marginalised group that I'm going to refer to, and acknowledging in this particular case that when you have a male writer giving voice to marginalised groups, there's a problematic sort of thing in there. And by acknowledging that, I'm actually opening up a whole paragraph I could write on it in my essay. And so then, but when I got near the end here, I was a little bit worried that I wasn't quite yet tight on the question. The question was specifically asking me to connect language with the representation, or giving voice more specifically to marginalised groups. And that's why I make sure that before I leave my introduction, I make sure I nail that down. By discussing the language of these women and the language used to marginalise them, we can see how they've been given a voice. And that's why that last thesis statement is so important, because if you don't nail that down in your introduction and you're not really on the question, the rest of your essay can just drift away miles and miles away, and it does compromise your mark. So let's go back to the things that we were talking about right at the start. In this, I decoded the kind of question. It was a discussion question. I've identified the key discriminators and the syllabus terms. I talked about marginalisation, voice and language. And then I related that to how it relates to our study text through the sample introduction. Hopefully that helps you out, and good luck.